This is Asian Insider, and I'm Nirmal Ghosh. Now, the results of elections in the United States thus far show a country deeply divided. That is not unexpected. These divisions emerged years ago and were there for all to see. The meteoric rise of Donald Trump to the presidency rode on these divisions. We became more acutely aware of the ocean of red in the middle of the country and the blue states around it. Within the red states, there are divisions as well. Metropolitan areas are often islands of liberal blue. Just a few miles into the countryside from where I sit in DC, and you find yourself in staunchly conservative red country. And more, it seems there is no actual dialogue between the two. Each occupies their own reality. Joe Biden just the other day said if he wins the presidency, he would unite the country. But even he said he was not naive enough to think it will be easy. A lot of people see this as, in fact, very dangerous for the United States. So to talk us through some of the forces at play here and what the results so far of this election are telling us, we're joined today by Professor Charles Zelden, historian and Professor of Political Science at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale in Florida, and by Mallory Newall, who is a research director at the Global Market and Public Opinion Research Organization, Ipsos. Mallory is in DC. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us at this busy time.
Glad to be here.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. May I start with you, Mallory? What is your take on the divisions within the United States? Some are using the phrase the Disunited States of America. How concerned should one really be?
Well, honestly, what we're witnessing with the presidential election right now is a perfect example of what's happening in this country. We're in a time period where we have high levels of distrust in institutions, incredibly deep political polarization, and high levels of uncertainty for the outcome of the election and what that's going to mean in the coming weeks. Compounding all of this is a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic where it's ravaging all states, red and blue states.
Yes, and the pandemic has certainly fed into everything and sort of changed the discourse completely. Professor Zelden, what is your takeaway from what's going on from what we see so far, the results of the election?
Well, what we're seeing in the election is that elections in the United States often are very close. While the Electoral College vote in the end may show a clear winner, when you look within the individual states, those wins may be less than 10,000 votes between the two candidates. We are a nation in conflict with itself. But I would add, as a historian, this is often a very natural state for the United States to be in. We have gone through a number of periods of social, political, economic transformation that has seen the parties represent differing and opposing visions of the future. And ultimately, one of those visions becomes dominant and things settle down after a while. But in the process, it can get quite contentious.
But a lot of people are saying that this time is particularly unprecedented and particularly charged politically. Is that a risk, Professor?
Well, compared to the 1850s, no. But then again, the 1850s resulted in a civil war. Compared to the conflicts that we saw in the 1960s, compared to the conflicts we saw as a result of the first peaceful transfer of power between parties in 1800, we're pretty contentious, and there's always a risk of things falling apart when this happens. Usually what ends up happening is that we start listening to each other, but it doesn't have to be that way. History is based on contingency, and we never know what the future is going to be. And right now, there's a lot of anger. You see that in the Latinos down here in Florida, who you talk to them, and they are absolutely freaked at the idea that Biden is going to produce the sort of socialist hell that they left back home. And this was a message sold to them by the Republican Party. And that sort of fear-based response doesn't make for good dialogue until things settle down, perhaps after a year or two of a successful Biden administration. There's not going to be a lot of room for compromise.
Mallory, if you look at all the divisions within America, are you hopeful for the country, or are you somewhat pessimistic, at least in the short and medium term?
Well, as a pollster, I want to turn an eye to the data, and what we're seeing in our public opinion polling, setting aside the presidential election and the horse race numbers, what we know now is that the number one issue for Americans right now is the coronavirus pandemic. It sort of colors all facets of our lives, of our behavior, and who we trust to deal with it. And then second, I'll say that this is a period of uncertainty unlike any other. I mentioned that before, but we're at a really unique time where we're asking the American public, do they think that there will be a peaceful transition of power between now and the next presidential term in January? And our polling shows that fewer than half, so less than a majority of Americans, are confident that that will be the case. So we're about to enter into perhaps a new presidency. That's at least, though we don't have the final results at this point in time, that's at least looking to be the most likely case. At a time where there's, mass division, huge political polarization, increased tribalism, and that's really governing all of our beliefs and actions. And again, that's compounded by a global pandemic.
Yes, in fact, I've seen polls which show that both sides think that the other is going to cheat to win the election, and they just take it as a given. It's almost baked in. Is that right?
Well, the integrity of our election is a concern for a majority of Americans. But the problem is, and this is a problem with a lot of issues these days, the opposing sides don't feel the same level of concern or the same concern about the same issues. What I mean by that is Democrats are concerned about election integrity from a standpoint of voter suppression and voter intimidation. Foreign interference as well. Republicans, on the other hand, are concerned about mail-in ballot fraud and voter fraud. And you're seeing that messaging being communicated to the bases on each side and actually playing out as we speak by President Trump's speeches lately about declaring victory or claiming count the votes, don't count the votes. So there's certainly this level of messaging around election integrity and what's at stake, but it's being communicated differently to each partisan side.
Yes, it's very interesting. I found in my sort of expeditions into the countryside at rallies and whatnot, if I talk to Trump supporters, they have a completely different view. They don't put the coronavirus top of their list of concerns at all. Whereas the Democratic supporters do that. That's quite interesting. We have very, very different approaches to this.
That's exactly right. But having a difference in opinion on the main issue is not new to this election cycle. We saw it in 2018, for example, the midterm elections in which Democrats were able to regain control of the House of Representatives. In that election, Republicans in our Reuters Ipsos polling said that immigration was their top concern, whereas Democrats said that it was healthcare. And so you have sort of this split narrative, which is largely informed by actors and leaders at the top, but also media and news consumption, where you get your news from. Somebody that's listening to, say, Fox News is going to have a very different reaction to current events than somebody who's getting their news from MSNBC.
Charles, if I may get back to the issue of conflict, I mean, you did mention the civil war, and there are actually groups out there who say they want another civil war. Now, yes, they are in a minority, but should we be concerned?
Well, if your concern is that you're going to have people dressing in blue and gray shooting guns at each other, probably not very. But if you're thinking of it as a term of people being at conflict with each other, viewing the other side as literally un-American or a threat to the nation, then we have very good reason to be worried. In Florida, for example, those who were most concerned about the coronavirus voted for Biden, but those who were most concerned about the economy and getting things back to normal, they voted for Trump. So it's literally looking at the same issue from opposite ends and seeing different problems which needs different solutions. And what'll happen is when you're not talking to each other in a way that communicates, but rather talking around each other or through each other, is after a while you start yelling at each other. And when you yell at each other, that often results in punching each other or the equivalent in terms of actual violence. So while I don't think we're going to get to the point of consistent violence, this may be a violent period in American history as each side fights for dominance for their worldview.
Right, Mallory. Quick word from you before we finish off. What do you think of the whole broad picture of these divisions and conflicts within America? When you look at the data, which way is it moving? Is it moving towards more problems, more divisions, more tribalism, or is it kind of stable? What does it tell you?
Well, Ipsos has been measuring these overarching trends since actually the rise of Trump in 2015. And this is not new. This is not a cause of Donald Trump. He is the byproduct of some of these larger undercurrents and larger changes in society. And so I think we will continue to see this increased tribalism in America. I see it with issues. When you ask about issues in a poll, almost everything, the biggest difference is between Democrats and Republicans. But as this country continues to change, as the demographics of the country continue to shift, I think we are going to continue to see this increased polarization.
Okay, Charles, just the last 30 seconds from you. An interesting point about demographics. A lot of people say, a lot of analysts and scholars say that what Trump represents is a sort of rearguard action against all the demographic changes coming into the United States, which is evident from the data. Do you concur with that?
I concur that is the case, but what this election has shown is that they're able to reach out to people who don't fit that model, who will accept that worldview. In particular, Trump's success with the Cuban voters here in South Florida. These are people you would think would be opposed to the mostly white perspective of the Trump side, of the Republicans, and yet they find themselves in agreement in what is the problem, economics, and what is the solution, less government. And so while it is a demographic breakdown, and it will continue to be so, we have to be careful about assuming that everything's going to be in white and black. There is going to be a shading in between the two parties, and the parties are going to have to work very hard to keep or gain these groups in the middle.
It seems very binary at the moment, though. It does seem very black and white. Whomever when I watch cable TV, and I watch all the channels because I need to know what people are saying. It's socialism, Venezuela, Cuba, ruinous socialism, and then you have this sort of scare tactics which we talked about earlier. So the understanding of these issues is somewhat simplistic in the general public. I mean, I hate to say that.
It is simplistic because complexity is difficult, and people want simple answers. They want answers that give them good, easy to understand solutions to their worries and to their problems. And in the case of Trump, he's basically saying, trust in me and I'll fix everything. In the case of Biden, he's saying, Give me a chance and I'll pull the pieces back together. And in both cases, there's a simplicity to it that is enticing. Unfortunately, real answers usually are much more complex and much more difficult than that. There's a lot of work that's going to need to be done to pull this country back together.
Okay, Mallory Newall, Charles Zelden, thank you so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. All the best.
Glad to be here.
The world is watching with great and increasing concern as America struggles with its internal divisions. The current election might show the way out. We will just have to wait and see. For Asian Insider, I'm Nirmal Ghosh.